Imagine being 6 years old and forced to take care of your little siblings, cooking meals, cleaning the house, and managing everything while your parents go about their day like nothing's wrong. Instead of enjoying childhood, you're stuck in the role of a free nanny, expected to juggle tasks meant for adults. And when you start to trust that things might change, you discover a shocking secret. Your parents have been stealing money meant for your future. They've been pocketing $32,000 in government aid money that was supposed to help you. This is my story, one of manipulation, betrayal, and the lengths my parents went to control me. Stay tuned for the wild details about how my childhood became a nightmare. When I think back to my childhood, there's one thing that stands out above everything else: responsibility. But this wasn't the kind of responsibility that taught me life lessons or helped me grow into a mature adult. It was the kind of responsibility that stole my childhood. I didn't know what playtime was, or having fun with friends, or even going to school like other kids. My normal was being the adult in the house, doing everything that my parents should have been doing. It started when I was about 6 years old. At that age, most kids are just learning how to tie their shoes, play with toys, and make friends. But not me. I was expected to take care of my siblings. And when I say take care, I mean everything. Feeding them, making sure they were safe, cleaning up after them, and even managing things like laundry and dishes. I remember when I first realized it wasn't just something I was helping with, it was my job. My parents never told me, "Hey, can you help out?" They just expected me to do it. No questions asked. The house was never quiet. It was always chaos. The younger kids would cry, fight, or need attention, and it was up to me to calm them down or settle things. My parents were hardly around, always busy with their own lives, doing whatever they felt like. They were supposed to be the ones looking after us, guiding us through life. But instead, I became the caretaker. It wasn't just the occasional chore either. This became my daily routine, and it wasn't just physical work. The emotional toll started to pile on. There were times I felt completely alone, like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't get to play with my friends after school or go to birthday parties like the other kids. I was too busy making sure everything in the house ran smoothly. It wasn't long before I started feeling like I was just another piece of furniture in the house, doing what I was told without being asked. Sometimes my parents would say things like, "This is just part of growing up," or "You're old enough now, you need to help." But I wasn't ready for any of that. 6 years old is supposed to be about learning how to be a kid, not taking on the full responsibility of a household. Looking back, I realize now that this wasn't just about teaching me responsibility, it was about control. My parents used my childhood to serve their own needs. They didn't have to worry about paying for a nanny or daycare because I was the free built-in solution to their problems. They didn't have to lift a finger, and I was too young to even understand what was happening. They used me, and it took me a long time to even realize it. Every day felt like I was walking in a fog, constantly doing things for other people while getting nothing in return. But it wasn't just the chores and the taking care of my siblings that was draining. It was the way my parents made me feel when I would question it. If I ever asked to do something for myself, whether it was to have a moment of peace, to play outside, or to do homework, I was made to feel guilty. They'd say things like, "Don't you want to help your family?" Or, "We're doing this because we love you." But I couldn't see it. They weren't doing this for me. They were doing this to me. It felt like my own identity was slipping away. I wasn't just a kid anymore. I was the free nanny, and it wasn't just exhausting physically. It was mentally and emotionally draining. When you're that young, you're just learning how to navigate relationships and emotions. You don't have the tools to understand what's happening. I just thought this was how life was supposed to be. The idea that parents should be taking care of their kids seemed so distant, almost impossible. I wasn't allowed to be a child. This was my reality. A life where I felt like I had to act like an adult, long before I was ready. And it didn't stop there. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The shift from helping out with a few things here and there to being the full-time caretaker happened slowly, almost without me realizing it. One day, I was just doing my usual chores, putting away laundry, making lunch for my siblings, and the next. It felt like I was responsible for everything. It wasn't like there was an official conversation where my parents said, "All right, from now on you're in charge." Instead, it just became the unspoken rule. I was the one who did it all. From morning to night, I remember the first time I truly understood how deep I was in this role. My parents were going out for the evening, leaving me alone with my younger siblings. At that moment, it felt like a normal thing. Parents go out, and the oldest kid stays behind to take care of things. But then it dawned on me that this wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't just babysitting. This was my life now. I was suddenly expected to manage everything: cleaning, cooking, making sure my siblings were fed and safe, handling their tantrums when they didn't want to eat or go to bed, keeping the house in order, and doing everything my parents should have been doing. At 6 years old, I couldn't even begin to understand the weight of what was being asked of me. I had no concept of why this responsibility was falling on my shoulders. All I knew was that if I didn't do everything, things would spiral. I became afraid of disappointing my parents, because every time they came home and saw that something wasn't perfect, if a sibling was upset, or the house wasn't clean enough, they'd get angry. It wasn't like I ever got a reward for my work either. There was no thank you or good job. I didn't get extra time to play or have some special privilege, because I was shouldering these grown-up responsibilities. If anything, my parents would just give me a disappointed look, or lecture me about how I should be doing more. It was as if I was constantly walking on eggshells, always trying to balance everything and keep my parents happy, but knowing deep down that no matter how much I did, it would never be enough. And that's when I started to notice the pattern. It wasn't just about taking care of my siblings. My parents began to ask me to do more and more. I'd cook dinner, simple meals, nothing fancy, and clean the kitchen afterward. I'd wash and fold clothes for everyone in the house. If my siblings fought, I was expected to break up the fight and comfort them. If they needed help with homework, I would try my best to guide them through it, even though I was still learning myself. What made it even harder was that my parents didn't exactly make things easy for me. They never told me how to do any of this. I wasn't given instructions or an allowance, or even any training. I was just thrown into it and expected to figure it out. No matter what went wrong, I was the one who had to face the consequences. If something wasn't done perfectly, or if the house was too messy when they came home, the blame was always placed squarely on me, and there was no escape from it. I didn't realize that this wasn't normal. I thought every kid had to do this kind of thing. I didn't know any better. My friends at school seemed so carefree, talking about their weekend plans or what they did after school. And here I was, struggling to keep a house running while still trying to be a kid. I couldn't even tell my friends what I was dealing with because I didn't have the words to explain it. I just felt embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to know that I was essentially raising my younger siblings while my parents did whatever they wanted. As time went on, the pressure became unbearable. It wasn't just that I was taking care of the household chores, I was expected to do it. If I didn't, my parents would start using guilt against me. They'd say things like, "You're the oldest. You should know how to help." Or, "If you really loved your family, you'd do this." The emotional manipulation was subtle, but incredibly effective. It was like they were planting this idea in my head that I wasn't enough. No matter how much I did, it was never enough. The worst part? I started believing it. I started thinking maybe I really wasn't doing enough. Maybe I wasn't good enough. I began to lose track of what normal childhood was supposed to be. I didn't know what a normal home was like anymore. I had no idea that other kids weren't going through the same thing. I felt trapped in my own house, surrounded by responsibilities that I didn't choose but was stuck with. But the real shock came when I started to understand the full scale of what was happening. It wasn't just the constant chores and responsibilities that were being piled onto me. My parents weren't just using me as their unpaid help. They were also stealing something that was meant for me, something I didn't even know existed. That's when I found out about the aid. I'll never forget the day I stumbled upon the truth. It wasn't something that was obvious at first, and it certainly wasn't something my parents would have ever told me about. But eventually the pieces started falling into place, and what I learned shook me to my core. I was just a kid, trying to manage everything in the household, thinking I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. But what I didn't know was that my parents were secretly benefiting in ways I could never have imagined. I was around 8 years old when I first overheard my parents talking about something called government aid. I didn't really know what it was at the time, but I heard them mention it in a conversation. They talked about how they had been receiving money from the government, specifically meant for me. This wasn't just any aid, either. It was money that was meant to support my education, my medical needs, and my overall well-being. The aid was meant to help cover costs that my parents couldn't afford, but it was my money, designed to make sure I had the resources I needed to grow up healthy and educated. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was a child. I didn't fully understand what government aid even meant, or how much money was involved. But as time went on, I began to see small signs that made me curious. I noticed that our financial situation wasn't exactly great. My parents didn't talk about their finances openly, but I could tell that there was always some struggle when it came to paying bills. However, we always seemed to get by just barely. Then one day, I accidentally saw something that made everything click. I found a letter lying around, one that my parents had left out on the kitchen table. It was addressed to them, but the return address looked official, like it came from some government office. I remember opening it up, not realizing the significance at the time, and seeing a large sum of money written in the letter. There were numbers and terms I didn't understand, but the words approved and financial aid stood out to me. That's when it hit me, this aid was for me. I had no idea how much money it was at first, but it felt wrong. I started thinking back to everything I'd been doing in the house, taking care of the family, cooking, cleaning, and running errands. I was the one who had been doing all of the adult work, and here my parents were, getting money that should have been used for Manat, for whatever they were spending it on. As the months went by, I became more and more suspicious. I started asking questions, but my parents would always dodge the subject. They'd tell me it was nothing to worry about, that they were taking care of everything, and that I should just focus on my chores and my responsibilities as the oldest child. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Eventually, I found out how much money had been taken. $32,000. That's right, $32,000. I had no idea where it all went, but I knew it was meant for me. I couldn't help but feel angry and confused. This money wasn't for new clothes, or for their personal use, or even for anything to help them out. It was meant to help me too, ensure I had everything I needed to be healthy, to get an education, and to live a good life. Instead, it had been taken and used for whatever my parents wanted. The realization was crushing. I wasn't just being used to take care of my siblings. I was being taken advantage of in ways I could never have imagined. And what made it even worse was the fact that my parents had been so secretive about it. They never told me. They never gave me any idea that this aid existed or that it was meant for my future. They kept it hidden, and every time I worked harder to keep the house in order. They were secretly profiting from my labor and my childhood. At that moment, I felt betrayed in a way I couldn't even put into words. I had been working so hard to be the good kid, to do everything my parents asked of me, but they weren't helping me at all. They were exploiting me using my childhood to get by, and taking money that was meant for my future. I remember confronting them about it. It was one of the hardest things I ever did. I was still just a kid, but I had reached a point where I couldn't stay silent anymore. I asked them, point blank, why they had been taking the money that was meant for me. They tried to downplay it at first, acting like it wasn't a big deal, but I could see it in their faces. They were lying, they were hiding something, and deep down, I knew that the truth was worse than they were letting on. They gave me excuses, things like, we needed it more than you right now, or you'll understand when you're older. But the fact was, they didn't need that money for me. They needed it for themselves. It wasn't like they were struggling to survive or make ends meet. They were perfectly capable of supporting themselves, but they chose to use me, my childhood, my innocence, a way to cover their own shortcomings. The worst part wasn't just the money. It was the fact that they had manipulated me for so long without me even realizing it. They'd made me feel like I was the one responsible for everything, the one who had to take care of them. But in reality, they were the ones who had been taking care of themselves, using me as a tool, a free nanny, and a source of financial benefit all along. It was a wake-up call. I knew things had to change, but I didn't know how. I felt trapped in my own home, where everything I did, every meal I cooked, every sibling I cared for, every chore I did was just another way my parents were profiting off my childhood. The discovery of the $32,000 in stolen aid hit me like a ton of bricks. For the first time, I felt like I had seen the truth. My parents weren't just neglecting me, they were actively using me for their benefit, all while pretending to be the loving, hardworking parents they weren't. I was angry, confused, and hurt beyond measure. But as I would soon learn, the manipulation didn't stop there. No, it only escalated from this point on. I remember sitting down with them, after I had found out about the aid, trying to get answers. I was a child, yes, but I felt like I needed to stand up for myself. I couldn't let them keep using me and taking what was mine. I confronted them about the money and how wrong it was for them to keep it hidden from me. My heart was pounding in my chest as I spoke, trying to make them understand that what they had done wasn't just unfair, it was wrong. But instead of apologizing or showing any sort of remorse, my parents turned the tables. They didn't admit guilt. They didn't apologize. Instead, they tried to guilt trip me into feeling sorry for them. You don't understand how hard things are for us, my mom said, her voice almost pleading. We're just trying to make sure the family survives, and you have to understand, we need that money more than you do right now. My dad chimed in, his tone more defensive than caring. You think life is easy? If we didn't use that money, what would we do? The system isn't here to help us. You need to be more understanding of the sacrifices we've made. And there it was. Instead of taking responsibility, they started making me feel guilty. They twisted the entire situation, manipulating me into thinking that I was the problem. They didn't just want to deflect blame. They wanted to convince me that their actions were justified because of how hard their lives were. The message was clear. I wasn't just their child. I was the one who had to make sacrifices for the family's well-being. The worst part of all of this, it worked at least for a moment. I was just a kid, and the way they framed everything made me question myself. I began thinking that maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't being fair. After all, they had always told me that family comes first, and that I needed to help, no matter the cost. They had always ingrained in me that this was just what responsible people did. They even said things like, you should be thankful we're giving you a chance to help your family. Most kids don't get that opportunity. It was classic emotional manipulation. They were making me feel as though I was the one in the wrong, not them. I was the one who was supposed to understand their sacrifices. I was the one who had to take care of everything, even if it meant I was suffering. They'd been doing it for so long that I'd almost started to believe them. But deep down, I knew that what they were doing was wrong. I knew that this wasn't the way a family was supposed to work. I should have been able to trust them, not just as parents, but as the adults who were supposed to care for me. Instead, I had become their scapegoat, their tool for getting by. They even tried to make me feel bad about confronting them. You think you can just take money from us like that? They would say. You can't just demand things from us without understanding the bigger picture. This was the worst part. The manipulation was no longer just about the chores or the aid money. It was about controlling me emotionally. It was about making me feel small and insignificant. They wanted me to feel so guilty that I wouldn't even ask for what was mine anymore. But then, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them make me feel like this was my fault anymore. I was still just a kid, but I realized that I couldn't let them keep pushing me down. So, I did the only thing I could. I shut down, I stopped arguing, I stopped pleading. I refused to take responsibility for what was happening. They had pushed me too far. For the first time, I saw them clearly for what they were: manipulative, controlling, and selfish. Over the next few days, I started to pull away emotionally. I didn't want to talk to them anymore. I didn't want to be their free nanny or the person who fixed everything. I had nothing left to give. The guilt they had tried to instill in me didn't stick. I realized that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough for them. They didn't want to make things better. They just wanted to continue using me. But the emotional toll it took was exhausting. I felt torn between wanting to escape and knowing that my younger siblings were still in the situation. I couldn't just leave them behind. I couldn't forget what they were going through. And I couldn't ignore that I was the only one in the house who even seemed to care about their well-being. That's when I started making small steps toward freeing myself from the emotional hold they had over me. I stopped doing things that weren't my responsibility. I stopped giving in to their manipulation. It wasn't easy, but I was done playing their game. I couldn't save myself and my siblings from everything, but I knew I had to start by saving myself. In the end, it wasn't just about the money or the chores, it was about reclaiming my life. My parents had stolen so much from me, but I couldn't let them take everything. I had to take back control, even if it meant pushing them away. If you've ever felt like you were taken advantage of or manipulated by someone you loved and trusted, then you know how difficult it can be to break free from that cycle. My story is just one example of how deep emotional manipulation can go, and how important it is to recognize the red flags and reclaim your power. If you want to hear more about my journey and how I found the strength to stand up for myself, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss the next part of this crazy story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Also, drop a comment below and share your own experiences or thoughts. Have you ever faced something similar? How did you handle it? Let's talk about it together, because the more we share, the more we can support each other. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.